This has to be the most embarrassing game I think I've ever really seen. I mean, it is Game 7, you have a chance to make the Western Conference Finals, you were considered to be the best team in the league, and you go down like that. It's a shame to see. Mind you, this is coming from a diehard Phoenix Suns fan. It's also kind of crazy to think about how this was about a year ago, a little over a year ago, because obviously the playoffs are over now. But I saw a screenshot of the full game highlights appear on Twitter because of someone I know named AJ Hilgen who quote tweeted it talking about it. And when I saw that, I kind of thought of an idea to go back and see what has happened ever since that Game 7, because a lot has changed for both teams. I think the most obvious way to start this out is going over how the Phoenix Suns did after this. And spoiler alert, it's really not that good. Now, I said this in the intro, but the Phoenix Suns at that point were considered to be the best team in basketball. It was a wide known thing, and honestly, it was fair. They had the best record. Devin Booker was playing like an MVP candidate, and they had the best depth in the NBA. At least that's what a lot of people were saying. I mean, picking the Phoenix Suns wasn't the sexiest pick, but it was like the most obvious one. At least that's what the perspective was. So yeah, them getting in a Game 7 situation versus a team that was just supposed to be another pit stop on their way to the Western Conference Finals was not a good look. And then to get blown out in Game 7 by that same team, yeah, it did not end well for them. And a lot of people started to change the way they felt about Phoenix. I felt like after that series, them being contenders was just non-existent. Everyone decided to start doubting them, which was justified to a point. As the offseason went on and conversations started to happen, it felt like Phoenix almost started to become underrated, which was kind of weird to me. Remember, this was the #1 seed at one point. This was a team that was considered to be the best. However, because of one game and one series that granted was detrimental, they were now considered to be a 5 or 6 seed, hell, maybe even a play-in team. Now, as much as I would love to combat this, I'm not gonna lie, they didn't really have a counter argument. I mean, Phoenix did get embarrassed the way they did. And it's not like free agency helped, because they didn't really make that many moves other than losing JaVale McGee, ironically, to the Dallas Mavericks. Some people are arguing that Phoenix was in a pretty decent position because they had brought back the same team from the previous year, but that might have been the issue, because this team was good. I just don't think they were ready to win. I don't think they were at that step. I mean, even if you go inside the team, you look at the chemistry, Monty Williams and DeAndre Ayton, they were constantly beefing. These two did not like each other, no matter what they tried to tell you, which hindsight is 2020, and some reports have came out about how Monty's coaching actually was, which could also maybe explain why Jay Crowder decided to just completely sit out the entire season until he got traded, which would eventually happen. Okay, so y'all remember when I said that Phoenix was not ready for a championship? They didn't have the roster that was built for that moment. Well, after getting a new owner in Matt Ishbia, because the old one, Matt Ishbia, as a brand new owner, decided to make a splash, and he would trade for Kevin Durant in exchange for Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, and Jay Crowder, and some picks. A lot of people thought this was a good move, which I'm going to agree with, despite it kind of taking down the depth a little bit, which was expected. I still do believe getting a Hall of Famer, a still superstar in Kevin Durant, was a great move for this team. But if you've seen the past 5 championships, you would know it's not the star players that are the reason they win. Obviously, they have a very big role. Like, not having Steph Curry on the Warriors, obviously the Warriors would not win. But having great depth and having a great rounded lineup is what helps you win games. And that's exactly what Phoenix was lacking. They did not have depth. They tried to get it, but they really didn't have it. Which is why when Phoenix finally got to the playoffs and in their first round matchup, they struggled against the Clippers, who were missing some very important players. It just didn't look good. I mean, the fact they only won in 6 with a team that did not have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George was fucking embarrassing. Now, maybe we could call it a fluke, sure, but in the second round, well, we know how that went. Denver would win in 6, which I'll give Phoenix some credit because they were the only team to take Denver to 6. And despite what some people might try to tell you, I do think that Phoenix was Denver's best competition. Now, right after they would lose in the playoffs to Denver, and as the offseason came, Phoenix made a couple big moves. For one, they would exchange Chris Paul for Bradley Beal, which I would argue is an upgrade. They would also heavily work on their depth, the one thing that everyone knew they did not have, and was the reason why they could not get a championship, let alone make it to the Western Conference Finals once again. And now we're in August. The season starts in about a couple months, and Phoenix has a lot they could possibly do this year. Now, if you're not a Suns fan, I think it is kind of funny or ironic that they got blown out in Game 7 versus the Mavericks, and then in Game 6 a year later, the same exact thing happened. But look, Phoenix has damn near a brand new team, and I think things are going to look good this year, but I guess we're going to have to wait and see. But did they come out on top in the entire situation? Well, let's look at Dallas. Dallas winning that series was honestly seen as kind of an underdog move, because because remember, Phoenix was considered to be the best team in the league. After beating Phoenix, they would play the Warriors in the Western Conference Finals, and they just got outmatched. When I looked at the game, I didn't see not one way that Dallas was actually going to compete in the series. I was very surprised they even took a game. While Phoenix was trying to compete for Kevin Durant and made little to no moves, at the end of the day, the Mavericks actually made a lot of moves. For one, they would acquire Christian Wood from a trade from the Houston Rockets, which seemed like it could be a really good move for the team. Now, earlier in the video, I did also say that they would steal JaVale McGee from the Phoenix Suns, which was kind of confusing because they got Christian Wood, but maybe it was for depth. In the NBA draft, they would also get Jaden Hardy, which is starting to look like it could be a pretty solid selection depending how he develops. But what was probably their biggest blow is they ended up losing Jalen Brunson, which some thought, oh, it's not going to be that big of a deal. But if you've seen how he's done in New York recently, yeah, them losing Jalen Brunson was one of the worst things that could have happened to that team. Now, what happened to the Mavericks this season, I don't know if I can truly explain like how they got to this point. The Mavericks the entire year were kind of a playing team. They were right on that bubble of, oh, now we're a 5 seed. Okay, now we dropped to the 7 and 8. Like they were just continuously barely holding on. On top of that, remember Christian Wood, that guy said that could help them out. Well, they were barely playing him. It was overall just a weird dynamic the way they were using him, but I think that's one of the reasons why they were struggling. And just to add insult to injury, I think everyone started to learn that, hey, Jalen Brunson could be an all-star if given the opportunity, which he was given in New York. But speaking of point guards that they would need, during the trade deadline, somehow the Dallas Mavericks were able to acquire Kyrie Irving off of a trade that basically destroyed the team. The Mavericks essentially traded all of their defense and all of their solid three-point shooters, not including Luka. And while getting Kyrie Irving is obviously going to be a benefit, there are so many ways it can go. It's not like a set good thing, if that makes sense. For example, if you get Damian Lillard, you know you're going to get a great player who's going to give it his all, who's going to be averaging this many points, and he's going to help your team do this and that. And I do think there's a number of guys like that, okay, you get this player on your team, you know exactly what you're signing up for. But Kyrie Irving is not exactly like that. Now, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt this time around because he hasn't really done anything in Dallas, at least in a negative way. He hasn't gotten any controversy. He hasn't missed any games besides due to injury, which does happen. Now, it's weird. The rest of the season, a lot of people thought this team was going to fight for a play-in spot and then make the playoffs and then shake things up. But at the end of the season, they kind of just didn't. At the end of the season, if you look at like the way the games went, you would start to notice like Dallas was constantly losing. And in the final game of the season, they actually had an opportunity to make the playoffs even after everything that happened. First of all, like the starting lineup didn't make sense. They had a bunch of rotation guys in, but Luka was starting. In fact, Luka played part of the game, but only for like 12 minutes. He didn't play that much. And then Dallas would end up losing the game. If it wasn't obvious enough, Dallas was obviously tanking, but it was weird on why they did it. I guess the best explanation would be they wanted to keep their draft pick because they knew, hey, we're not competing for a championship this year. And I would argue getting Derek Lively with their pick was a pretty solid pickup, and hopefully for them it does work out. It was weird, man, but regardless, Dallas is now coming into the offseason with Kyrie Irving, who is going to come back, and I'd say a pretty similar team with a couple of additions and minuses. I do think it's interesting to look back at the game because it really wasn't that long ago. It seems like it's been forever, but in reality it hasn't. Phoenix is looking to be contenders, and I think Dallas is trying to do the same thing as well, which I felt like was a very similar situation to what we were dealing with last year, and hell, maybe even the season before. Now, speaking of things we need to go back and look at, we need to revisit the Ben Simmons situation, which I actually did a video about a couple days ago, which you guys should go check it out. The video is on the screen right here.